It's almost operatic.
Changing for the better. I think now we're headed for a turn for the worse, and that is the general mood.
Where do you think things go?
It's very hard to tell. There's some people who believe that we're on the verge of war, in fact. The Israeli government, following the assassination of Minister Ze'evi, issued an ultimatum to Yasser Arafat to hand over Ze'evi's assassins and to outlaw several organizations. Both demands apparently cannot be met by Arafat. He cannot hand over people who assassinated Ze'evi. We don't really know how the Israeli government will react, but in any case, its mood and its willingness to enter into a diplomatic process has decreased dramatically in the wake of the assassination.
Beria, let me ask you, how do you think that the events in Israel this week have played out in the region, which is already concerned with what's called the war on terror?
Well, you see, it's the whole mood is of terrorism anyway in the whole area, be it coming from the Israeli side or coming from Osama bin Laden, or it is all terrorism at the end of the day. What needs to be done to address all this, I think, is to look at the basic things. We say to the Israelis, come on, let's sit down, talk together, live together, solve our problems in peace, not by shooting each other. You see, a minister is a human being, just like the 10-year-old girl or like the other people who are dying every single day, simply because he's a minister, and he actually is one of the ministers that is known for his fanatism. I condemn any killing, a minister or in New York or a 10-year-old girl. It's all killing. They're all human beings at the end of the day.
Hemi, let me ask you, in terms of what you were writing in your column in Ma'ariv, in terms of what you were seeing elsewhere in the Israeli press, is there a view now, do you think, that the time has come to end contact with Mr. Arafat, to forget about trying to move forward this way?
Well, I wouldn't say that that is the overall mood. I think opinions in Israel, as they always are divided. The polls that were carried out this week, even in the wake of the assassination, showed the Israeli public more or less split down the middle, with half advocating an all-out war against Arafat and the other half advocating an acceleration of the peace process. I would say, however, that the country was genuinely shocked by the assassination of Ze'evi, not so much because of his personality and not so much because he is a minister, but rather this was seen as an affront and something which damaged Israel's democratic institutions, its very sovereignty. The question was not here whether a minister's life is worth more or less than a 10-year-old girl's. Obviously, one cannot quantify such things. The problem was that this was a strike at the heart of the Israeli establishment, and Israelis reacted accordingly.
Beria, let me ask you one last question. Any reason, any mood for optimism?
I think there should always be reason for optimism. And if I may say something to my friend over there, I think it is not, as he said, if it's a minister or not. And it's not always that the people of Palestine have to be on the receiving end of whoever mood is. The story and the cause is bigger than Sharon, is bigger than Arafat. And Arafat has always been accused of all the terrorists, if you call them between brackets, and we call them freedom fighters, as a matter of fact. It is bigger than both people. This is a cause for a whole people, the people of Israel and the people of Palestine. So unless and until we get a just, and I mean a just and lasting peace, and you know, the cause is going to go on, and you're going to have more terrorism.
Thank you, Beria Alamuddin of Al Hayat and Hemi Shalav of Ma'ariv in Jerusalem. Thank you both for joining us. That's this edition of International Correspondents. I'm Sheila McVicker in London. Thank you for joining us.
Industry is facing the biggest crisis of its history.
Discretionary travel is undoubtedly going to see a downturn.
If it's a reality that there is an unfair competition from the US airlines, we shall act.
The best response for the airline industry now is to lower the fares. Let's keep people flying. Let's keep the economy moving.
The future of the airline industry, part of business coverage continuing throughout the day on CNN.
Cairo Bureau Chief. A harrowing picture of events inside the World Trade Center has emerged from the records of the emergency workers who responded to the disaster. Here's Stephen Frazee.
8:47 a.m. Building explosion. Those two words, typed out by a New York City fire dispatcher, are the first record of what would become the worst terrorist attack in history. The dispatch logs from September 11th give us a glimpse of what it was like inside the World Trade Center that morning. 8:56 a.m., the first calls from the North Tower, paraphrased in the dispatch logs rather than transcribed word for word. 8:57 a.m., people screaming in background, cannot breathe, floor 103, trapped. 8:59, a call from the 86th floor, ceiling collapsed.
I see another plane approaching right now. Another plane just crashed in right now.
Another plane has crashed into the World Trade Center building.
9:03 a.m., both towers are under attack. At 9:09, a man in the North Tower says he's with 40 to 60 other people and they don't know which way to go. Moments later, the first call from the South Tower. Someone reports people are jumping out through a large hole. 9:12 a.m. A man on the 106th floor says he's with 100 people and they need directions on how to stay alive. 9:21. People trapped in a stairway. The doors are locked. Need someone to open the doors. 9:36 a.m. People trapped in an elevator. They say they are dying. The logs also show a desperate scramble to the top. 9:20 a.m., an evacuation to the top floor. 9:32, people on the 105th floor are looking for access to the roof. 9:49 a.m., 20 people are seen on the top. They are waving, still alive. Please send help. At 9:47 a.m., the first hint of what was to come. A woman in the South Tower says the floor underneath her is collapsing. 13 minutes later, a loud roar as the South Tower comes down. All calls from inside are cut off. 10:07 a.m., a plea from an emergency medical unit. Trapped. Building fell on them. Calls from the North Tower continued. Then at 10:26, another ominous warning from police aviation. It appears that the top of the tower is possibly leaning. 10:31 a.m., North Tower getting ready to fall. 10:33, entire tower down. The collapse of the World Trade Center towers was recorded in dispatch logs as Incident 0727. It ended with reports from emergency medical teams helping out the few survivors they could find.
Stephen Frazee there with that chilling account. I'm Michael Holmes, our continuing coverage on the strike against terror after the break.
Forget everything else. We've got all you need for an action-packed November right here on Star Sports. In the States, the bodies are primed and the fans are ready for the opening tip-off in a new season of the NBA. Then it's a six-day feast of world-class football with the Tiger Fives in Singapore. Bigger and better than ever with 12 teams, including the world champions, Spain. Take the winners of the 4 majors to Hawaii for a 36-hole stroke play tournament with $1 million up for grabs. And you have the PGA Grand Slam of golf. Then it's over to Spain and the brilliance of the Primera Liga. And follow the meteoric rise of tennis's new guard in the Tennis Masters Series by Mercedes-Benz. November on Star Sports.
This is CNN.
Michael Holmes with you at the CNN Centre, our continuing coverage of the strike against terror. As usual, an update for you now on the latest. Hundreds of residents are fleeing the southern Afghan city of Kandahar. They're leaving after the city came under its heaviest night of bombing yet. The Pentagon says it's used one of its largest conventional bombs in an effort to demoralise Taliban troops. Officials say they dropped a 2,200-kilogram bomb designed to destroy bunkers on a concentration of soldiers. British Prime Minister Tony Blair makes Cairo his second stop on his three-day tour through the Middle East. He's there trying to shore up support for the US-led attacks. Now, in the United States, FBI agents were called to the State Department after a suspicious powder was found in the mailroom. This comes after a third person in Florida has tested positive for exposure to anthrax. One person is already dead from the disease, and authorities have launched a criminal investigation. Well, NATO has thrown its support squarely behind the US anti-terror campaign. On Wednesday, the alliance discussed expanding its role in the operation. Major Garrett joining us now from Washington with more on that. Major, hi.
Good morning, Michael. Yes, indeed, NATO will be supplying not only diplomatic, but intelligence, financial help to the coalition against international terrorism, but it will also be providing the United States with tangible military assistance. For the first time in the NATO history, which dates back to 1949 in a Washington Treaty signed right here in Washington, the NATO has invoked Article 5, meaning an attack against one NATO member is attack against all, and in that, NATO will be providing airborne support for the United States, sending AWACS. Those are known as Airborne Warning and Control System planes to the United States along the eastern seaboard to protect the eastern seaboard against any potential terrorist attacks. The President noted this in his meeting Wednesday at the White House with NATO's Secretary General, Lord George Robertson, describing how unprecedented this type of security arrangement for the United States really is.
This has never happened before, that NATO has come to help defend our country. But it happened in this time of need, and for that we're grateful. Together, we're building a very strong coalition against terror. And NATO is the cornerstone of that coalition.
Lord George Robertson noted in the Rose Garden that when the United States signed on to that NATO treaty back in 1949, it probably assumed at that time that the United States would sometime in the near future have to come to the defense of an exhausted European ally. Now that the Europeans or NATO is coming to the defense of the United States, the situation's a good bit different. But George Robertson also pointed out that while the foes the NATO and the United States confront, the terrorist foes, are indeed formidable, they should not paralyze either the United States or NATO with fear.
These terrorists are not 10 feet tall. They are not insuperable. They're not unvanquishable, but we are. And we can win, and we certainly will win. And I'm very, very proud that NATO and the 19 nations of the alliance are at the heart of a global coalition against the most evil criminals of our age.
Now, Michael, the reason that NATO is providing those airborne air warning control radar planes for the eastern seaboard is the United States has devoted most of those types of resources to not only the field of battle over Afghanistan, but also over the northern and southern fly zone in Iraq. Those resources are stretched to the limit. That's why NATO's stepping in. Michael?
Major, been a lot of talk about when and if and how this campaign might expand beyond Afghanistan. What are you seeing there from your vantage point, or hearing about the possibility of that?
Well, there are certain placeholders that are being laid down, Michael. You saw them at the beginning of this week when the United States notified the United Nations that it believed it had every right and justification to expand its campaign against terror under the existing UN Security Council resolutions. Also, with Wednesday's announcement of a 22 most wanted list of international terrorists, there were terrorists named on that list of 22 that are not directly linked to Al-Qaeda, but other terrorist acts those terrorists are based in other locations. A very clear signal, all of these things being taken together, that quite clearly the United States reserves the right and may indeed expand this campaign against terrorism beyond the borders of Afghanistan.
All right, Major, thanks very much. Major Garrett there in Washington. Well, the depth of Moscow's commitment to the fight against terror is forcing other partners in the war to reassess their image of Russia. CNN's Moscow bureau chief, Jill Doherty, tells us the government's changing attitude to the West is likely to win it some new friends.
It's a scenario that could play out in the mountains of Afghanistan. A U.S. military plane on combat mission is hit. The pilot bails out. To his rescue, a Russian search and rescue crew. It's something that President Vladimir Putin, without specifics, publicly has offered the U.S.-led anti-terror coalition. But some in Moscow ask, what if Russia itself needed help against international terrorism?
Russia has to have American guarantees and assurances that if Russia becomes a subject of, an object of terrorist attacks in future, it will be entitled for American help and American protection.
Russia is not a full member of NATO entitled to its protections, and Moscow has not asked for specific security guarantees. But the West nonetheless says Russia would get help.
If the Russians had been victims of the same kind of barbaric, appalling attack, then our reaction would be exactly the same. We would offer them help. We expected them to help us because they're the kind of country they are. They would expect us to help, and they'd get it.
Russia still says it will not take part in any combat operations, but even promises like these were unthinkable even a month ago. And Western diplomatic sources say Russia's role in the international coalition against terrorism is leading to extraordinarily new and unprecedented forms of military-to-military cooperation. It is Vladimir Putin himself, most observers believe, who's the driving force.
It looks like now that the single liberal in this country and single pro-Western politician here is Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, who tried to push our military and political elite to understand the existing challenges of this new world. It's absolutely clear that the most part of our military elite is absolutely unable to understand these new challenges.
Russia, some diplomatic observers say, has been looking for a long-term security partnership with the West. President Putin now sees a chance to cement that partnership, and the West is ready to reciprocate. Jill Doherty, CNN, Moscow.
I'm Michael Holmes at the CNN Centre. Thanks for watching. Our coverage will continue.
There are the headlines, and then there's Insight. Each weekday, we bring you the stories behind the story, an in-depth analysis of the latest developments in the war against terror. Insight, only on CNN.
Watch CNN for more city forecasts throughout the day.
"15 years ago this week, as CNN cameras rolled, U.S. President Ronald Reagan and Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev met in Reykjavik. The two traveled to Iceland's capital to set an agenda for a full-scale summit to be held later in the U.S. But the Reykjavik talks quickly turned into intense and detailed discussions over arms control. The first day of the talks was described as businesslike but upbeat. The second day saw remarkable progress on missile and weapons reduction. But then it all fell apart over the Strategic Defense Initiative, the so-called Star Wars system. Mr. Gorbachev demanded that the U.S. honor the 1972 ABM Treaty for 10 years, a treaty he insisted banned any work on SDI outside the laboratory. Mr. Reagan refused. At an impasse, the talks broke down, with each side blaming the other for the failure of the Reykjavik summit that began 15 years ago this week.
The latest news on CNN.
NATO and the 19 nations of the alliance are at the heart of a global coalition against the most evil criminals of our age.
Welcome, it's World Business Today, Thursday, the 11th of October. I'm Richard Quest. Wall Street scored a winning session on Wednesday, amid signs that investor confidence may be seeping back into the market. The ongoing strikes in Afghanistan that seem to be going according to plan, together with the upbeat earnings news from several US corporations, all seems to have persuaded buyers that it's time to test the waters. The numbers, the Dow Jones Industrials up over 2% to 9240. The Nasdaq Composite, a 3.5% gainer, 1626. Both indices are now only 4% down from the closing numbers on September the 10th, the day, of course, before the US terror attacks. In the following week, the Dow slumped 14% and the Nasdaq dropped 16%. So it appears that much of those losses have now been reclaimed. The S&P 500 gained 2.25% for the day. Europe's financial markets are set to open in just around about 20 minutes to half an hour.
The Israeli cabinet in emergency session.
The country was ready to confront the aggression.
CNN special correspondents are on the ground and on the web, bringing you the news as it happens.
Brent?
CNN, Baghdad.
When the world wants news from the Middle East in Arabic, CNNArabic.com. Be the first to know in Arabic.
First, our top stories.
Some other stories making headlines in our This past week has seen new developments.
Suicide bombing punctuates the controversy.
And those are the headlines.
Now for a look into more.
Every week, go inside Africa with CNN. For a look at stories you won't see anywhere else. Arts and culture. Business news. Politics. All of Africa, now. For stories as diverse as the continent, Tumi Mahabu takes you inside Africa. Sundays, only on CNN.
Welcome back. Let's take a look at the headlines. Indian security forces impose a curfew on the province of Jammu in Kashmir after a shootout with suspected Muslim rebels at a temple complex. 13 people died and 50 were wounded in the two-day standoff. French truckers are manning roadblocks after overnight talks between employers and union leaders failed. The country is also bracing for a 32-hour strike planned by air traffic controllers. And off the coast of Hong Kong, rough waters are hampering attempts to extinguish a fire aboard a tanker carrying 20,000 tons of liquefied petroleum gas. Iraq's foreign minister has sent a letter to the United Nations attacking the weapons inspections as a pretext for the U.S. to attack his country. Official responses from members of the Arab League to the wording of the UN resolution have been cautious. Joining me now is Baria Alamuddin, foreign editor of Al Hayat, a pan-Arabic newspaper, and she's based in London. Thank you for being with us. So, we've been reporting in the weeks and even months before this UN resolution actually came into effect that in the Arab world there is great skepticism as to the real intentions of some Western countries, the US and the UK namely. Is that what you feel reporting on these issues for an Arabic newspaper?
Well, definitely amongst the masses, amongst the populations, yes. And unfortunately, this feeling, is increased all the time when the American administration is seen not to be acting fairly as far as other Middle Eastern issues, mainly the Palestinian problem. Hence, the population feels they are being victimized by the Americans mainly, and of course the British secondly. As far as Iraq is concerned, one has to make a very clear distinction between what the Arab populations feel towards the Iraqi regime and what they feel towards the people. Nobody has a love for the Iraqi regime. Everybody feels it's a repressive regime. Everybody knows it's not democratic. Everybody knows what the Iraqi regime has done.
But however, they're not willing to accept that politics within their own country are dictated from outside. Would you agree with that?
Yes, well, you see, the Arab governments are not totally with a war against Iraq, I mean. The Arab governments have made it very clear that they want to go with any UN resolution, which they have, which even Syria, as you very well know. And in a late meeting on Wednesday, I believe, in Damascus, Arab governments again, there was a meeting of many Arab foreign ministers, have called again for Iraq to implement fully the UN resolution 1441. So Arab governments are not very far from the position of the people in this respect.
So what about perhaps a feeling that if Iraq does implement fully the UN resolution, does cooperate fully with the inspectors, is there a feeling still, some optimism that war can be avoided? That's what we were asking our reporter in Baghdad. What are you feeling from other Arab countries?
Well, there is a very strong feeling that the Americans will find a pretext. There is a feeling about the inevitability of a war in Iraq. But Arab governments are trying always to be optimistic. You know, you get always statements, and Arab government officials are giving interviews to the effect that we are hopeful. The Iraqis have so far been very cooperative, etc., etc. However, nobody likes the language that's coming out of the states, always, specifically the states, which is always very skeptical about Arab positions and the Iraqi position. I wish the Americans will be seen to be a little bit more fair, and let us give them a chance. And then, if not, then let's indeed go on with 1441.
Okay. What about close U.S. allies like Saudi Arabia, like Kuwait, who initially were so enthusiastic during the first Gulf War? There is a feeling that they're just not as enthusiastic this time. Why?
That's definitely true. Because they feel that the circumstances have changed, that Arab population are not with it. You see, first there was a very clear reason. There was this aggression coming from Iraq towards Kuwait. There was a feeling, I want to protect myself. Iraq is not being seen as a threat now
to Arab. Might not be financially in their interest. Is that another
Absolutely,
reason?
but I hope, well, none of them is saying we are going to commit to any financial assistance to that war at all. None of them is saying, including Kuwait. But of course, you know, when the situation comes that Iraq is not implementing 1441, then I think war will be inevitable.
All right, Baria Alamuddin, thank you very much from Al Hayat. We've got to leave it there. Let's get a quick look at the weather picture now for some major travel destinations. Jenny Harrison joins us from the World Weather Center.
Hello again, Hannah. It's a rather cloudy day in London today and tomorrow, but there shouldn't be any sign of rain just yet this week, but I'm afraid we can't say the same.
Dedicated to keeping the Spanish audience informed and up to date. CNN Plus is more than just news. The stories that matter most as soon as they happen. Spain, Europe, the world. We've got it covered. CNN Plus.
Tougher. Stronger. Probing questions. Demanding answers. Tuesday through Thursday, Q&A with Zane Virgie, only on CNN.
A cut in European interest rates. It's very likely by the end of the year. The big question is, will it come today? The European Central Bank, which meets later this morning in Vienna, has already locked rates 3 times this year. The ECB's last cut was 0.5%, September the 17th. Now, that was clearly aimed at shoring up confidence immediately following the attacks in New York. Some Eurozone politicians say that now more needs to be done. So, many European market players remain sceptical because the ECB has, after all, hinted it may not mirror the US Federal Reserve's 50 basis points cut. Also into this maelstrom of economics, we've got numbers out from Germany. Inflation last month about 2.1%. Let's get some analysis. Kevin Gaynor, he's the current head of the European Economic Research at UBS Warburg. Kevin, let's start with these German inflation, CPI, consumer inflation, 2.1%, under control. You can cut rates. Go ahead.
Yes, please. We'd love a rate cut today. It would be very nice indeed. The German numbers are just the final release for September, and they do just underline that the inflationary pressures that were coming from the oil price side are receding fairly quickly now. There's certainly not an inflation problem out there.
So Europe's largest economy doesn't have an inflationary problem. Therefore, the ECB, do you think, will actually cut today?
Well, we've been forecasting a cut today, but I've got to say, some of the comments coming out of the members of the Executive Board and the Governing Council of the ECB suggest that they may well hold off today. I think, frankly, they don't really know what they're going to do either. They are meeting in Vienna, as you said. They've never cut rates or moved policy at all whilst away from Frankfurt. Doesn't mean they can't do something today, but some of the commentary has been quite bizarre in how strong it's been about the need to return to what they call normal. And unfortunately for us in the market, normal tends to be a disappointment.
Paul O'Neill, speaking in New York last night, an upbeat assessment of the US economy. Is he just pumping a balloon because he's a policymaker, or is there some justification to what he says?
I think there isn't an awful lot of justification at the moment, to be perfectly frank. It is part of his job to cheerlead. He's taken some flack for that. People have accused him of losing credibility and losing sort of sight of the real underlying economic conditions. I don't think that's fair. They are trying, as you said in your earlier package, to get another tax cut through of some size. And the one difference between the US and Europe is you've got a lot of policy flexibility coming through in the US, a big stimulus package in fiscal terms and monetary terms. Whereas Europe, we're having discussions about how much fiscal laxity we can have, very little. And the ECB clearly doesn't seem to want to prime the economy on the monetary side.
Kevin, if next year we do start to see a V-shaped recovery, which is still possible, you'll have to agree, then surely taking back not only the monetary stimulus, but also the very, I mean, let's face it, 2 bouts of fiscal stimulus on the way, that's going to be the priority.
You know, the Greenspan Fed is not adverse to taking back emergency rate cuts. And I think if you are right, and we did see some sort of V-shaped recovery, we'd have some rate hikes coming through. The question is, what sort of recovery do we get? And if it's one that's resulting in deficits rather than surpluses, then I suppose in the long-term view, you would expect rates to be higher than they would have been otherwise. But at the moment, I think that's a policy dilemma for later next year. We're still in a very low growth environment globally, and that's the risk case, Japan, right. Europe, and the US.
Kevin, current economist at UBS Warburg, many thanks indeed. Hopefully you'll still be the economist at UBS Warburg when we talk to you the next time. Many thanks indeed. Yahoo presented its third quarter scorecard after the closing bell in New York on Wednesday. The internet portal reported a loss, $24 million for the quarter. Advertising sales declined and therefore revenues dropped 44%. Yahoo also lowered its earnings targets. In the fourth quarter, jobs may have to go. Eurostar Group, which operates the Eurotunnel rail link between Britain, France and Belgium, is reportedly facing a sharp fall in bookings following the US attack. The Financial Times reports that bookings by Americans have fallen by 70% in the last month. US nationals represent 1 out of 10 passengers travelling through the undersea train tunnel. Eurostar is now expected to postpone the date it hits profitability till 2004. The bond brokerage Cantor Fitzgerald has pledged to give 1/4 of its profits for at least the next 5 years to the families of employees killed in the World Trade Center attacks. That's in addition to paying healthcare charges for 10 years. Cantor will also speed up the payment of bonuses and commissions to the families. Cantor lost more than 700 employees in the attacks. The anthrax cases in Florida have put many US citizens on the defensive, and sales of vaccines, ammunition, bulletproof vests and gas masks have soared. CNN's Bruce Francis now takes a closer look at a company that's scrambling to meet this increased demand for personal defense products.
With military spending dwindling, making gas masks looked like a dead-end business to KX Industries CEO Evan Koslow. So in 1998, Koslow focused the company on water filters and air purifiers. But after September 11th, he knew that times were changing back.
It suddenly occurred to me literally at night. I just broke into a sweat and I said, wait a second, we've got to start the gas mask production lines again.
Koslow dug up old inventory, contacted former suppliers to get back critical machinery, and scoured for former workers. The goal, restart the line in 2 to 3 weeks, producing 1,000 to 2,000 masks per week. No reliable statistics exist, but it's estimated that worldwide, only about 25 companies produce a total of 3 million military-grade gas masks a year.
Kozlow believes that an additional 1.5 to 2.5 million masks are needed, mostly for the military, rescue workers, and medical personnel. The most prized on the web right now, gas masks from Israel, where the threat of bioterror has been a way of life for years. Still, public health officials are unanimous in discouraging consumers from buying gas masks.
The last thing you'd recommend is that they get a gas mask. This is really useless, and in fact, it can be dangerous.
Kozlow agrees.
But we're not really recommending that they buy any equipment at all. In fact, we're advising against that.
And while he's wary of again depending on government spending, the greater danger is in not retooling the business. Bruce Francis, CNN Financial News, New York.
Finally from us, the 2001 Nobel Prize in Economics, the biggest prize in the industry, was awarded on Tuesday. 3 US economists were the lucky recipients. George Akerlof, Michael Spence, and Joseph Stiglitz were honored for their work on a concept called asymmetric information. Their theory overturned the traditional notion that markets function perfectly. Instead, they suggest that intervention by governments and other financial institutions may be needed when markets fail. Mr. Stiglitz said he believed economics could be used to narrow inequalities.
I believe very strongly that economics can make a very large difference. And I've spent much of the last recent years, and actually been involved in this for 30 years, on the issues of development and concern about the disparity between the haves and the have-nots, between the very poor, who are so numerous in this world, and the inequities, and the fact that much of our global economic system is characterized by a lot of inequities.
Joseph Stiglitz is a former chief economist with the World Bank, and he was a member of President Clinton's Council of Economic Advisors. And that's our world business today. I'm Richard Quest. There's more business news in roughly 30 minutes. Stay with CNN, though. The European markets open in about 4 or 5 minutes' time. We'll have updates as the day progresses, and also our coverage of the war against terror continues. CNN, around the world, around the clock.
Backed by Demand. All new episodes featuring those canine professionals. From walking the tightrope to mothering cheetahs. These dogs hang out in the unlikeliest places, wherever their work takes them. Get ready. It's some serious doggy mayhem, and it's coming your way. Better round up the kids, because these dogs mean business. All new episodes of Dogs with Jobs, Thursday on the National Geographic Channel.
SCB Max Rewards, a whole new world of year-round perks are here to stay. A lucky winner every day. A special treat from us on your birthday. Chalk up points to redeem free services and more. Our exclusive bi-monthly newsletter with great news and promotions. Join in our year-end celebrations with our annual lucky draw. Life is so rewarding with SCB Max Rewards.
This is CNN.
Hello, I'm Colleen McEdwards at CNN Center. Ahead in the next hour, live reports from Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Washington as well. Also, how the September 11th attacks are affecting the global economy. And we'll go aboard a U.S. aircraft carrier taking part in the airstrikes. But first, we want to bring you the very latest developments. Hundreds of Afghans have evacuated the Taliban's spiritual base of Kandahar in the wake of some of the heaviest Allied airstrikes yet. U.S.-led raids in Afghanistan continue into the daylight hours. Muslim leaders meeting in Qatar have condemned the September 11th terrorist attacks in the United States and chosen not to oppose the U.S.-led bombardments in Afghanistan. A criminal investigation gets underway as U.S. authorities report a third person, a woman, has been exposed to the deadly anthrax bacteria in Florida. Well, let's go straight to Tom Mantir in Islamabad now for the latest that he has been able to gather for us from there. Tom?
Colleen, good morning. The front page paper says it all. This is the Dawn, the front page paper here in Islamabad, and it talks about U.S. planes landing supposedly 4 airfields cleared for operation. Now, we did talk to senior Pakistani officials today saying they're not going to comment on these reports, but did remind us that the president initially promised the unstinted support of his military, his government, saying that he would provide the U.S. with intelligence, with airspace, and with logistical support. Now, this may fall into logistical support. They say that they have pledged logistical support, quoting now, "We continue to provide that support. No disclosure of the tactical nature of this logistical supply." They did go further to say that, asked if there are U.S. military planes and personnel on the ground. These are operational items which I cannot comment on. So they are saying that there are no offensive operations being launched from Pakistan to Afghanistan, saying that these are logistical reasons only, if indeed there are U.S. planes or personnel in Pakistan. But this has been rumored well before the strikes even began, that the U.S. military might pre-position some supplies and logistics here in Pakistan. It should be pointed out that the USS Kitty Hawk is now off the coast of Pakistan, being able to provide 4.5 acres of U.S. sovereign territory if indeed they need to launch heliborne assaults into Afghanistan. But as it stands right now, the Pakistani government basically refusing to confirm or deny that U.S. military troops or personnel or airplanes are indeed on Pakistani soil, saying simply this is part of the logistical operation, and going any further would reveal tactical or operational details, something they are very, very reluctant to do. Colleen?
Although, Tom, we know from U.S. officials and also from what we've been hearing from inside Afghanistan, these latest airstrikes have been very heavy. What more is known at this point about the movement of people from those areas?
Well, it should be pointed out this is the second day where full daylight bombing is occurring inside Afghanistan. And the pictures we're seeing out of Kandahar, now this is by video phone, and it's